Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about two features of Autodesk Navisworks, that being the Timeliner and the Animator. Well, the Timeliner is a tool that will add schedule simulation to Navisworks. It imports schedules from a variety of sources. You could bring in a schedule from Microsoft Project. I believe another application that works with Navisworks is Primavera, and you can also bring in a CSV file to get started there. And you can connect tasks in those schedules with objects in the model to create a simulation. This allows you to see the effects of the schedule on the model and compare planned dates against actual dates. You can also assign costs to those tasks if you need to. And the Timeliner will also let you export images and the animations so you can share those video files with anyone else who might not be using the software. Now, the Animator tool links object and viewpoint behaviors to your construction schedules, and that can enhance the quality of your simulations. For instance, you can start your simulation with a camera showing an overview of the whole project, and then as the tasks are simulated, zoom into specific areas for a detailed view. You can also play animation scenes as the tasks are simulated, which is nice. For example, you can animate the arrival and depletion of the material stockpiles that might be on the site, as well as monitor any vehicular access to the site. And I'm going to show you something similar to that today. So today's scenario looks like this. I'm going to show you the removal of one set of plant equipment and its associated objects, then replace it with new equipment installation, something like swapping one assembly line for another. While that's happening, I'm going to show you how to include a camera flyby so you can see this happen from different angles while the simulation is running. Here are a couple of snapshots of the before and after that we're going to be dealing with today. On the left, you can see what we'll be starting with, and on the right, what we'll have when we're done. All of these models are in the same area of the so-called plant, which is why we need to remove one to make room for the other. And here's a sample video exported from the Timeliner showing the results of what we're about to do. As you can see, the simulation shows the removal of the current items and then the new items coming in after, and the flyby happening at the same time. All right, so let's get into Navisworks and get started. So here is our models. They come from a variety of other Autodesk applications. So I'm trying to simulate the different types of objects we're going to be dealing with and where they come from. So first of all, looking at the selection tree here, I do have a building which was done in Revit. It's just a simple pole barn. We also have a file from Plant 3D that includes piping and the associated equipment that it's connected to. There's also a file containing the structure. This one, it's just a mezzanine. It was started in Plant 3D and it was finished in Advanced Steel. And lastly, we have a work cell. That's the file that's interfering with everything else down there on the floor. This is an assembly that came from Inventor, and it also includes content from the factory design utility. So we've got a really diverse project here. Files coming from many different sources, just to show you that Navisworks doesn't care where the models come from. It can handle it. And so it's now up to us to show that sequence of for switching out these two groups of models. All right, over on the right side here, I've got my saved viewpoints that you can see here. Just have a bird's eye view of what you're looking at. And then another view that is going to come in handy when we start the camera flyby. This is my start view. And that's the only reason I created it, because that's what I want to jump to when I'm ready to start moving the camera around the scene. You can have more viewpoints if you want. Most of us do, depending on what we're doing in Navisworks. We might have many different viewpoints, and that's okay. They will all come in handy when you're ready to use them with the Animator. All right, down here on my selection sets here, I went ahead and created some selection sets. This is part of my prep. When I know I am going to be working with the timeliner or the Animator, I like to have my selection sets ready to go beforehand. This will cut down on the picking of objects in the scene over and over again later on when we're trying to work on the timeline or the camera sequencing. And I numbered them in the order that I need to use them in. That's just to help my own thinking. You can do this however you want. I'm just showing you what works for me. All right, so the models are here. I've got my viewpoints ready to use. I've got selection sets ready as well, so we can get right into the timeliner. Now, if you don't see the timeliner anywhere on your screen, to turn those on, you'll find those controls on the Home tab on the Tools panel right here. Mine are already turned on. I've just got them collapsed around the edge of the screen. So that's how you will turn those two windows on if you don't have them already. For me, they're tucked down here on the bottom of the screen. All right, so you can put those anywhere you want, just like any other window. They are draggable. They can be pulled off of your screen. You can pin them. You can pull them to your other monitor, which is ideal when you are doing this back at your desk. For me, so you can see everything that I'm doing, I have mine docked at the bottom of the screen, and then I do have them pinned, and you'll see me stretching these quite a bit just so we can see more of the tasks, and then I'll shrink this down when it's time to view so we can watch the simulation. So if you see me doing a lot of dragging here, then that's why I'm doing it. Normally, I would recommend taking all your windows to your other monitor so I can have a lot more model view on screen here. All right, so for now, I'm just going to drag it to about right there to get started, and then we'll go to work on the timeliner. Now, before I start with my tasks, I like to set the window up to only show what I need. So as you can see here, the Gantt chart, which is usually out here to the right, is already hidden. You can control that with this button right here to show and hide the Gantt chart. All I'm doing is setting up my tasks right now, so I don't really need that. So I'll turn it off. I'm a big fan of just turning off whatever I don't need. If I don't need something, I'd rather not have to look at it. All right, so I'll have that hidden. Next, I like to configure my column display to only show me the columns that I'm going to be working with. Do that with this button right here for columns. And I like to use the basic, but when you're working in Navisworks, if you've never done this before, then you're probably looking at the standard display, which looks like this. You'll see the name, which is common across all of the displays, the planned start and end dates. You also have the actual start and end dates, the task type, your selections that you'll have attached to each task, and then total cost. Well, some of these fields I don't need right now, so that's why I'm going with the basic display. If I don't need to fill in a column, then it doesn't need to be here right now. And it is very easy to switch between these different choices, so at any time you can switch them on the fly. Now, if you want something that's more custom, then you can go and choose your columns and then pick whatever you want. Fortunately, Navisworks gives me one that I can use out of the box, and so that's why I like the basic one. So we'll go with that. And then I'm just going to create a task here to get started. I am going to do a few of these manually, and then I'll do a few in a more automated fashion. And I'm just going to go one task at a time. So this first task, I'm going to line up with my selection sets. So I'm going to go into my demo mode here. So my first task is going to be a demo of the piping components. So I'm going to write this task name as demo piping, just like that. And I'm going to press the tab key to advance over to the next column. If I press the enter key, that is going to create a new task. And every time you hit the enter key, then it's going to do that. So this could clog up your list here, and you'll have to go and delete those if you don't want them. So that's why I'm going to use the tab key here. That will advance you along your columns. The enter key will create another task. For the planned start date, I'll just choose today. For the planned end date, I'm also going to choose today. So I'm going to pretend that it's going to take, one workday to remove the piping from this sequence. All right. Now, notice that on the planned start and end, all I can see is the date. It is possible to show the time in addition to the date. That's in the Navisworks options. I'll show that to you in a moment. The reason I have this turned off right now is so that I can work with a standard workday, which is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I don't have to worry about the times being out of whack. So with those turned off, then Navisworks assumes the standard workday. If you want to control the hours, then here's how you do that. We'll go up to Navisworks, the Applications button, and go to Options, and then expand on the Tools branch, and then choose Timeliner, and then check the box to show time. Now, since I already have a task here, I have to clear that like this. And what I'm doing here is just picking inside the box to activate it and pressing the delete key before I can do that. I'm showing you that on purpose because sometimes Navisworks can play tricks on you in certain areas, and this is one of them. It didn't show me the time yet, and that's because I already had that those dates entered for that first task. So now when I go back into Options and down to Timeliner, now I can show the time. And then when I enter a brand new date, the time will be there with it. So I'll just click in those boxes there, and there you go. That's just a little quirky thing. If you're not aware of that, you may wonder, why you set that option and it didn't change. That's the reason why. It's because it already had something set on one of your tasks. So now we can see it. And as you can see here, notice the time. It is not 8 o'clock for a start and 5 o'clock for an end. And that's why I don't like having that visible right now. So that gives me one more property that I have to deal with when I really shouldn't have to. So again, I'm going to clear those two boxes. Then I'm going to go back and turn off the time display. So if you don't need the time with your dates when you're setting up tasks, then that's what I suggest, is to leave that turned off. And we'll just let Navisworks assume that standard workday. So that'll take care of the dates for the first task. For the task type, you got 3 choices: construct, demolish, and temporary. This is going to be a demolish task since we're removing equipment for these first set of tasks. All right. For the attach column, I'm going to right-click in that column, and then I'm going to choose attach set, and then choose my first selection set. And this is why I pre-configure my selection sets, because now as we start creating more tasks, we can very quickly pick a set of objects without having to go out and manually pick individual ones. It's much easier if these are already set up. All right, so there's the first task. I'm going to add a few more tasks to take care of the rest of the items that I want to demolish. So I need 6 total. So I'm going to click the Add Task button 5 more times, and I'll go ahead and name these. So for the next task, I'm going to remove the equipment. So I'll just call that Demo Equipment. This time I will hit the Enter key and just let it drop down to the next task. And we'll enter Demo Railing, Demo Grading, and right now I'm just reading these right off of my selection sets, which are right above the timeliner. Demo Access, which is any stairs or ladders and things like that. And the last one is demo structure. And oh, I hit enter just out of habit, so it did create a new task. And if that ever happens to you, just come up to the toolbar and choose delete task. No big deal there. All right, so here's a set of tasks to demolish the plant equipment. For the plan start and plan end, I'm just going to choose one day to the next. So I'm starting today. Tomorrow, we'll remove the equipment, so I'm going to choose March 6th for the date, and we'll just go fill these in one day at a time. And this won't take but a few moments. When we reach the weekend, I'll account for that. So I'll jump over to Monday here. Some tasks will take more than one day to complete. That's totally understandable. Just for the demo here today, I'm just going to do one day for each of my selection sets. All right, so that takes care of those. For the task type, I'm going to do this a little bit different. Instead of clicking in each box and choosing demolish, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click and drag on my first task, highlight all of those rows just with a click and drag. And then for the task type, right click on that first one. So I'm going to right click on demolish and then choose fill down. And that will populate the rest of those rows that I have selected. So if you have a lot of tasks and you want to fill in a column rather quickly, then that's how you do it, with a right click and choose fill down. I could do that with the plan start and the planned end dates, but then, you know, if I did that here, I'd have March 5th for every date. I'd have to go and edit those. So that I might as well just fill those in, you know, the old-fashioned way on those. But it works great for those where you can fill down and then you're done. All right. And the last task here that I need to do is attach the selection sets. So I'm going to go to the demo equipment task, right click for the attachment, attach the set, and then choose the equipment set. And repeat that for each of the others. And this is where having those sets ready ahead of time really comes in handy. This is a part of the timeliner where I see people stopping. They'll go out and select a bunch of objects in the model, or they'll go to the selection tree up here and open up the branches and start selecting, and they're picking and picking and picking, and then they right click here and attach a current selection, which is fine, but you will find yourself repeating that when you don't have to. So if you have those sets ready to go, it's a whole lot faster. So there's my sets. And then I'm ready to simulate this first section here. To do that, I'm going to switch over to the Simulate tab and then just click the play button. And we'll start seeing some items turn red for a moment and then they disappear. And that means they're being demolished. If you see a pause, that means there's a weekend in play there. And I'll rewind and I'll play that one more time. Drag down the timeliner to increase the model area. So it looks pretty good. Everything seems to be demolished in the order that I want, but it does seem kind of fast. And that's just because the duration of the total simulation is set to 10 seconds by default. We can easily change that just by coming in to the settings here on the Simulate tab and change the playback duration. So the more tasks you add, the longer you're going to want the playback duration to be. Right now, 10 seconds is okay. So that's the first set of tasks. We'll expand that window a little bit there. Now I could keep going and add the tasks for the elements that I'm going to add, which would be that manufacturing work cell in the middle there. But instead of manually adding more tasks, I'm going to show you another way and do this in a little more automatic fashion. So I'm just going to reset this file back to the way it was before we started. So I've got an empty timeliner, except this time, instead of adding the task manually, I'm going to choose Auto Add Tasks. for every set. And what that's going to do is create a task for each selection set that I've created already. When I do that, here's what happens. Now I have a task for every single selection set. The date started with today, and it added 1 day for each selection set. It accounted for weekends automatically. So if you notice right here, March 8th is this Friday. It knew there's a weekend, so it just follows the calendar. I didn't have to do anything. The selection sets are already assigned. You can't get much faster than that, gang. This is my favorite way of doing this, and that's why I spend time on the selection sets up front. The only tweak that you'll have to make for a timeliner like this is those first 6 tasks need to be demolished. So that's all I have to change. So I'll change the first one, and then I'll do what I did before, highlight those first 6 tasks, right-click on the demolish task here on the first one, and fill down. You do it that way, then you're done. Now we can simulate. Make the view a little bigger there. So with very little effort, if you have your selection sets pre-configured, then you can auto add the tasks and you really don't have to do anything. The only other work you might need to do there is if you're having, one task takes 3 days, another one takes 5, then you might be tweaking the dates. But it's still going to be quicker than manually creating every task. The other thing I notice here is now a 10-second duration on the simulation doesn't seem like enough. It seems like everything's moving very quickly. Before you know it, the whole simulation is over. So now we have enough tasks where it's a good idea to go into the settings on the Simulate tab and change the playback duration. I'll change it to 20 seconds, and then we'll play it again and see how that looks. Now that's a lot better. So now we can see that each task, once it starts to get demolished, it holds for a moment, and then it disappears, and then the next one comes up. I'm pretty happy with the duration on that. But if you want to make it longer, you can just play with that. Just keep changing the playback duration, and that will either add or subtract a little bit of time for each of those in the sequence. All right. Let's go back to the tasks. And let's do some organization in the timeliner. So we've got this list here. And these can get long rather quickly. So I'm going to show you how to do some grouping and help organize the tasks here just to make it easier to view. And I've got 6 tasks that are demolish tasks. I've got another set that are construct. So let's do some grouping. To do that, I'm going to select on the first task, and then in the toolbar, I'm going to choose Insert Task. And what that's going to do is add a new task right above that one. And I'm going to call this task here Demo, and that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to worry about a start or end date or the task type and so on. Then I'm going to select the actual tasks that are the demolish tasks, and then down the toolbar, choose Indent. And that's going to scoop those 6 tasks underneath the one I just created. So now I can collapse that as a branch and treat those as a group. And I'm going to repeat that for the new tasks. So I'll pick the one that's left here on top. We'll go to Insert Task, and this one I'm going to name New. I suppose I could call it Construct or whatever makes sense. But again, no reason to include the start and end date. Then we'll grab the remaining tasks and indent those. Now I've got 2 groups. I've got a demo group and I've got a new group. Notice that as soon as you indent, then that task that's the parent task will capture the total start and end dates for all of the tasks that are underneath it. Go Go ahead and expand those so we can look at all of them. Okay, that doesn't change the simulation. All it does is allow for some better organization. Once you reach that point where you have a long list of tasks, and makes it easier to find things and read. You know, it's easy for eyes to go cross-eyed because it is starting to look like a spreadsheet. You know, the more lines you have, you know, the easier it is for us to go cross-eyed, at least for me anyway. All right, so we're going to let those just be the way they are. And we have our simulation done, which means we're ready to work on the camera flyby. And for that, we're going to use the Animator. So we'll switch over to the Animator tab. I don't need as much screen space for the Animator here, so I'm going to make this a little bit thinner. And just like the Timeliner, where we have to add tasks to get started, we have to do something similar with the Animator, except here we add a scene. And that button is right here to get started. It's the little green plus. So we're going to add a scene. And then we're going to name the scene. And typically, if I'm doing a flyby, that's what I name my scene. So this is going to be called flyby. So first we add a scene. Then you're going to right click on your new scene and go to add camera in blank camera. That's all you have to do. When you do that, you'll see a black bar show up on this timeline, and that controls the when and the where, or the what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so as you slide the black bar across the timeline here, then that sets the time that you're going to be showing your camera. Right? Now we are going to start at 0, so I'm just going to click on the stop button, and that will set that back to 0. I could also key in a value in the time editor right here. So we're going to start at 0. That's the first thing you're going to do. Next, you're going to set your view. And since we're just getting started, I'm going to use my viewpoint called Start. So at time 0, we want to be in this view. And then on the toolbar, we're going to choose Capture Keyframe, which is this button right here. All right, and that's the first step. And so in the Animator, that's the workflow. First, we're going to set the time. Then we're going to set our view. And then we're going to capture a keyframe. And we just repeat that for every time we need the camera to do something. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm either going to drag the slider bar where I want it. Sometimes it's a little tough to grab that and move it. But when you drag it, it's a little more freehand, so you may not be able to get to an exact second or minute. So you could drag it. What I prefer to do is just highlight the time that's shown here and enter seconds. So I'm going to go 3, and that's going to move the slider to 3 seconds. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to change the view. And I'm going to do this one manually. I prefer to do this just by zooming and orbiting and panning. You could also use another viewpoint if you want, if you've already got those created. Here I'm just going to do one on my own. So at 3 seconds, this is where I want the camera to be, and then I'll choose Capture Keyframe. And we're going to back out here because since I didn't have the camera line highlighted here, looks like I lost the selection there, so we'll kind of reset things. All right, there we go. So we'll go to 3 seconds. We'll just repeat that. Since nothing's been captured yet, no harm has been done. So about right there, that's where we were before. Then we'll capture keyframe. Then we'll change the time again. We'll go down to, say, 7 seconds. Adjust our view. Again, if I have another viewpoint, I could choose it here as well. So maybe about right there. Capture keyframe. Then we'll go down to 10 seconds. And then we will start a zoom in. Now here, given these models, we get down here, it's a bit congested. You can see everything. If you have too much in your way, it is okay to hide objects. That won't hurt your animator here. I can't really see everything in the construct sequence here because all the models are visible. So what I'm going to do here is use the selection tree. I'm going to select the plant and the structure models and just hide them. That way I can get a clear look at that work cell. Set that the way I want. Maybe something like that. Go ahead and capture the keyframe. And then at this point I can do an unhide all and bring those back. Go ahead and deselect all those while we're at it. Now we're still looking at too much, but I know that the camera view is okay. So that's at 10 seconds. Now once the camera reaches that point, it's not going to move anymore. So I am going to move out to 20 seconds. I'm doing that because the simulation that's already set up in the timeliner, that is set up to 20 seconds. So I'm going to make the animator duration the same. So I'm going to move the time out to 20 seconds and do one more capture keyframe. So at 10 seconds, the camera is looking at this direction, and at 20 seconds, it's in the same spot. So I'm just holding it at both ends. That's all I'm doing. All right. So now's a good time to check that sequence and see what we're dealing with. So I'm going to click on stop. That's going to bring us back to 0. We're at our start view, and then we'll play it. And we're looking at just the camera now. So it goes up to 3 seconds, starts to turn. When it gets to 7 seconds, it starts to zoom in. When it gets to 10, it's going to hold for the last 10 seconds, and then it's going to be the end of the simulation. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, we've got two different sequences here. We've got our simulation sequence, and we've got our camera sequence. Once you have those two pieces complete, we can link them together. To do that, you'll switch back to the timeliner and go to the Simulate tab, and then go into the settings. If you need to, you can tweak your playback duration. I like to have both durations the same, so I'm not going to change it here. We're going to go down to Animation and then choose the flyby. Once you create an animation with the animator, it will show up in this list. All right, and that's all we're going to do there, is just link the flyby to the timeliner. And then click the play button, and you'll be able to see the camera sequence and the construction sequence all at once. It is going to appear with a little bit of jerkiness when you're using this playback tool. That's not going to show when we do an export. It will be smooth. That's just a side effect of the playback tool. Since it's playing back essentially two sequences at once, then that's why it looks like that during playback. But that's all we're doing here is review type work. This won't be the finished product. Here, we'll play it one more time. Also notice when we get to about 7 seconds, looks like we're zooming in, but the structure's still in the way. So we might do a modification to the camera. Okay. Also, we can drag the slider bar that's on the timeliner. So that's what I'll do here. So if you notice, when we get to about right here, the camera starts to zoom in, but we still have the structure in the way. I think it would be nice if we had a pause, maybe right here somewhere on the camera, let it hold, and then zoom in. And that might clear that up just a little bit. So we'll switch back to the animator for a moment. And let's see, and one more item here, if you notice here, I'll show you this because it could happen to you. I'm trying to select on my keyframes, but nothing is happening. If that happens to you, that is because over on the timeliner, you're still on the Simulate tab. So in order to release the simulation, click on the Tasks tab, and then when you go back to the animator, you'll have control. So if you ever feel like you're stuck in the animator, that could be why. So just switch back to the timeliner and make sure that you're on the Tasks tab. Okay, so what we're going to do over here in the Animator is right about there, we want to put a pause in here so that the camera stops and waits before it zooms in. To do that, we're going to copy this keyframe right here. Now to do that, what I like to do is I like to drag the time slider out of the way and then just hover on one of the keyframes that you'd like to copy. Just right click on it and choose copy. And then I'll come near 9 seconds, right click again and choose paste. And that will place a keyframe similar to the other one at that point, and then you can drag that keyframe wherever you want. We're going to have it at about 9 seconds, and that keyframe includes the viewpoint when we captured it. So now we're at 7 seconds and we're approaching. It's going to pause for 2 seconds and then it's going to zoom in. Now when I added that, now there's only 1 second between the pause and the zoom, so it's moving in kind of quick. And since I can drag these keyframes, I'll take the keyframe that's at 10 seconds and just drag it to 11 seconds, and that should add a little more space, a little more room to do that zoom in. All right, so we'll give that a look here one last time. So there it is at 3 seconds. Now it's moving over. When it hits 7, it's going to pause, and then it's going to zoom in. It's already linked to the timeliner, so when we go back over to the timeliner and simulate that playback, we don't have to do anything. All we did was tweak the animation, and since it's already linked in, then this will update for us. There's your pause. That allows a little more time for the structure to get demolished, and then the zoom in occurs. You can see the weekend there, and there you go. Okay, so we've done our timeline, we've done our tasks, we've got our animator set up the way we want for our camera flyby. Now is the time to export. So once we produce this, we're going to export it so that way you can share it with people who don't use Navisworks. The export button is on the Simulate tab, and it's all the way to the right. It's the only button over there. And this is what we'll use to export the animation. Now what you're looking at here are my default settings. I hardly ever change these, but if I needed to, I could change the source, and we could export just the animator scene or the timeliner simulation, either one. But since we link the two together, then we can go with the default. You have two renderers at your disposal. The viewport is what you're seeing right now, so what you see is what you get. You could also use the Autodesk renderer, and then Navisworks will render each frame in the animation. Now in this case, we don't need to do that since we're not doing any kind of lighting in Navisworks. There's no reason to render. The viewport renderer is just fine. You got a few choices for your output. We can export images and then stitch it together in a third-party program to create the video if that's your workflow, or you can go straight to a Windows AVI. That's what I normally do. It's so easy to do. I see no reason to do any post-production. All right, now if you have compression issues with your video, you may have some choices depending on what other software you have installed on your computer. Most computers, if they have Windows on them, they probably have that Microsoft Video 1 compressor, which is just fine. In all my time using Navisworks, I've never changed this setting. Not that you may not, or that you may need to, and that's fine. But you ought to just stick with the defaults for now until you start having those issues. Like I said, I've never had to change this, and the videos I've produced, no one's ever come back and said, you know, you need to use a different compressor. Now, the other one that might be common for just about everyone is the full frames uncompressed option. Now, that one might give you much higher quality, but it will also give you a much higher file size, which could be an issue when you're sharing it with other people. So if you stick with this, I think you'll be just fine. So we're going to do the timeliner simulation. We're going to use the viewport renderer, Windows AVI. For the size, here's my default. It's a great happy medium. For just about all screens or web pages that you might put this on, keeps the file size at a decent size for emailing or sharing over the internet. Lastly, the frames per second. That's what FPS stands for. I set mine to 30, and I've never changed that setting. And that will produce a very smooth video for you. You won't see any jitter or jerkiness. If you do, then you can increase or decrease that as needed. But if you start with these settings that you see here, I think you'll be just fine. If I click OK, it will start the export process. I've done that ahead of time, so you don't have to sit and wait for that. That was the video that you saw on my slide just a moment ago. And something of 20 seconds with this amount of work in it, it takes maybe a minute to a minute and a half to export. So not very long. So I'm just going to click cancel here. Since I did already show that to you, if anybody asks, I'm happy to bring that back up and show it to you again. In the meantime, I do want to share some tips with you. So that is the end of the demonstration for the timeliner and the animator. And so now I'd like to share with you a couple of tips. So first and foremost, in order for Navisworks to digest and show all of the AutoCAD objects from all the different tool sets, like Plant 3D, Civil 3D, and so forth, you'll want to install all the available object enablers when you install Navisworks. And that will ensure that all of the objects that are in those models will be visible in Navisworks. The link is shown here is where you go to download those. If you have any of those products installed already, then the enablers may not be needed. So if you have AutoCAD, you have Plant 3D, Advanced Steel, etc., and you have Navisworks installed, then you shouldn't need to install the object enablers. However, just to be on the safe side, I still recommend installing them, just for the sake of Navisworks. And you'll get them from this link here. Okay, next tip. Some of us have a lot of models appended when we're working in Navisworks, depending on project size. And when you do, you may notice longer load times when you open that file in Navisworks. And that's because it has to go and update, look for changes in the source models. You can get around this by saving your Navisworks file as an NWD. But only do this if the source models are done changing. Because once you save as NWD, that file will no longer update if the source models change. So keep that in mind. Next tips. We talked about the time display. That's in the Navisworks options. If you need hour-by-hour control over your tasks, then I recommend turning that option on. Since not all project schedules are going to abide by an 8 to 5 schedule, right? So if that's not an issue for you, then you may not need to turn that on. And I already showed you that if time is visible in the timeliner, then when you are creating tasks, it picks up whatever time it is the moment you create that task. So you could find yourself adjusting the times more often, and if it's not necessary, then I recommend leaving that off until you need it. Also in the timeliner, only show the columns that you're working with at any given time. Since it's so quick and easy to change the column display, you can adjust it at any time. As I said before, I use the basic display the most. And the one I use second most is the standard display when I'm including planned start dates and actual start dates against each other in the simulation. Lastly, use the arrow keys when setting and adjusting the dates and times versus just keying them in. Occasionally, Navisworks will play tricks on you in this area. So you may try to enter a different date or time, hit the enter key, and you'll see that your change did not take. That can happen, but if you use the arrow keys, for some reason, it always works. So keep that in mind. They just seem to be more reliable. Here's a few more tips. Again, plan your selection sets up front. If you know you're going to be using the timeliner or the animator, do those as early as possible. I like to precede my set names with numbers, so if I know I'm going to do like a step 1, step 2, step 3 type of a sequence, that's why you saw my selection set starting with 01, 02. If I'm doing demolition, I usually do that, and then for construction, I do 1, 1, 1, 2, and then if there's another sequence, 2, 1, 2, 2, etc. It's just an idea that I've been using for a while. You can do whatever makes sense for you. You also want to take some time to review all of the dates and times in your tasks. It doesn't take long for the timeliner to get filled up with a lot of tasks, and it will get harder to read. It's very easy to miss a date or a time, and it might be out of order. So my advice here is just slow down a little bit to prevent that. Before playing or exporting your simulation, check all of those settings. The main ones I check are the overall duration and whether or not I'm including the animation. That's really it. And lastly, use the animator for more control over what the camera is doing. It is possible to use a bunch of saved viewpoints here, but I think you'll find that trying to do an entire camera sequence by only using the viewpoints, it can be cumbersome. Remember in my example, I still used a viewpoint, but all I did was add it to the animator and then let the animator take over. And my last tip, again, is for the export settings. Just wanted you to see those settings once again. I found that these settings here work very well for most situations. It will provide a nice smooth video file, and it'll play back on any computer. Haven't run across one where these settings didn't work. If you need to adjust these, I suggest adjusting the resolution based on what type of screen you might be showing that on. But I'd keep the frames per second at 30 just to keep it smooth. Okay. Finally, I'd like to share our online resources with you. On our YouTube page, you can find the recordings for all our previous webcasts. This one will be available shortly after. Plus, we have plenty of articles on our blog at hagerman.com and even more content on our customer site. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Hope you got something out of today's webcast. Now I will answer any questions left over from the chat window. All right, so it looks like at the moment there's only one task here. And in the task type, can you add more tasks? I think if I'm reading that right, we are referring to demolish versus construct versus temporary. You know what? That is a terrific question. I haven't had anyone ask me that. I have never, personally anyway, have never had a need to have anything other than demo, construct, and temporary. So what I'd like to do for you there is I will make a note of that before we sign off here. I'm happy to do a little research on that and get you that answer. But that's something we should probably take offline. So I apologize for not answering that more directly now, but I will get you an answer. So thanks for the question. Okay, so that was the only question we had. Hopefully I answered all of yours. If you do have any other questions, you can feel free to contact us, and we will take care of you as best we can. So if that is all, again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.